Hello, and welcome to the No Bad Questions podcast, where I try to learn in a conversational manner by sitting down with people who have interesting careers, important lessons to tell, or inspiring stories. I hope that you learn something too. If you want to support the podcast, please follow or subscribe on your platform of choice. You can also like or comment to boost the algorithms or share out to your network to make sure it gets more views. But ultimately, and what I hope you choose to do, is listen to the very end. With that, we'll start today's podcast. Hello and welcome to this episode of the No Bad Questions podcast. Joining me again for the second time is Shay Eskew. Shay was the launchpad for this podcast. Very grateful for that. And it's been over a year since he and I talked on camera, although we've obviously had some conversations in between. Shay is a burn survivor, an Ironman champion, a best-selling author, a great human being, father of 5, former bear wrestler. If you're curious to hear more about Shay, he's on a number of podcasts, but obviously we would prefer that you check out episode 1 of No Bad Questions. Shay, thanks for coming back to talk with me today.
Hey, David, it's an honor to be here with you, and thanks so much for having me again.
So since we last talked on camera, you've done a couple things. And I wondered if you might enlighten the audience about the biggest of those, which was February of this year, 2023, and March, I believe, although I might be getting the dates off, and it was your 7X challenge. Talk to people about, first of all, what that is.
Yeah. Honestly, it's almost hard to describe it because it's never been attempted. I had a buddy of mine who's a Navy SEAL, Ryan Birdman Parrott, reached out to me over a year ago and said, look, I've got this crazy idea. And so I know if he says it's crazy, it's insane, right? And he goes, look, I want to do 7 continents in 7 days. But on each continent, I want there to be a skydive or a base jump, a marathon, and then a swim. And we would complete all these on every continent in 7 days. And the whole purpose, the mission, is to raise awareness for veterans' mental health. And so he put together a team of elite special force members. We had Delta Force, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, I mean, you name it. So there were 7 of us total athletes doing this. And then we had a support team of an additional 60 people that included Navy SEALs dietitian, Navy SEALs physical therapist. We had one of the most renowned plastic surgeons in the U.S. who was the first to do a face transplant. I mean, this team was the who's who, right? So we completed the mission February 25th of this year, 2023. And it's surreal. We ran 184 miles in those 7 days. And, for me, when people say, what was it like? I said, it's the highest of highs. And with that comes the lowest of the lows. And that was the whole intent when Birdman put this together. He wanted to simulate what it was like going to combat, right? Like, how do you get that adrenaline high and maintain it? And then a week later, come back and reacclimate to society. And it was a struggle, for me personally. It's one of those, like, I'm hanging out with these elite special force members. The stories they're sharing, you're like, you feel like part of the team, right? This is the stuff you read in books. And here you are hanging out with these guys, having the brotherhood, like you have this tribe that you feel a part of. And then literally, as soon as we get home, I'm back to being dad, right? I'm stopping at Target. I'm picking up some essentials, groceries. I'm rushing to a soccer field. And then 3 days after we finished it, I had knee surgery. Now, the knee surgery was not something that came as a result of the expedition. I needed the knee surgery before the expedition, but I knew if I had it, there's no way I could have the surgery, do all the rehab, and put in the training. So I put off the surgery for a year to allow me to get through all this.
How did you get linked up with these guys? And I mean, like you said, you're talking about, a lot of special operations folks from the military, elite surgeons and therapists and so forth, and you are an elite athlete, but how did that connection get made that they said, no, of all the human beings in the world, we want Shay Eskew to go along?
I don't know how you could characterize it other than God has a unique way of putting people in your path, right? Like, I believe if you share your dream, if you put it out to the world and say, look, I want to make a difference. If you're doing something incredible, let me know. And I had a friend who introduced me to Birdman via LinkedIn, which is a place that I think very highly of.
Mm-hmm.
He connected us back during COVID. And it was interesting. So when I first got connected to Birdman, back then it was because he had a nonprofit called Sons of the Flag who focused on burn care. He was blown up with an IED in Afghanistan, had to undergo some treatment. And so he wanted to provide that care to other burn survivors. And originally, he was focused only on military personnel, but then he expanded the mission to include civilians. And so when I met him, he goes, look, I know you need some surgeries. You've been putting this stuff off. Look, I've got this amazing network. Go through my guys, get this treatment. And so right before I had this massive surgery back in November of 2021, it was going to be the biggest surgery I've ever had. Right? The surgery alone takes 8 hours. And what he said, literally right before he goes, look, we're going to do this 7X, right? Like, as soon as you come out of the surgery, put in your time, do the healing, but then we're going to have 10 months for you to get ready to do the training. And so that was how we connected. We've had this brotherhood bond since then. I mean, he's an incredible human. The guy is so charitable and giving himself. And so when you have an opportunity to spend time with somebody like that, you jump at it, right? Because something amazing is going to come as a result of that.
Do you feel like the challenge accomplished the goals? Because I've had Commander Jimmy May on. He and I talked a little bit about veteran suicide and veteran mental health. And I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was 21 veterans a day, but then I feel like I've heard now it's up to 22 a day, and maybe it's more than that. And so that makes me honestly frustrated, because I feel like sounds like we're not making progress and potentially going backwards. And I worry about that. These are not a small portion of society. B, really valuable members of society. They've been, trained up by their government, to some of them to be very elite, high performing individuals. But also just any suicide is just such a waste of potential. So do you feel like it accomplished the goal of awareness? Is there more that we could do besides, continuing to have conversations about it like this? How did it go?
I do feel like it accomplished the goal of raising awareness. I know we've had so many conversations as a result of that. But I mean, it's a much bigger goal than just awareness, right? It's not meant to be a one-time event. Hey, we did it. Great. Let's go home and get back to our lives, right? It's ongoing. And you got to start somewhere. And that's why he wanted to do something big, was something to kick it off, to get people tuned in. And so I know, based off of the people following us on the journey, the amount of people supporting the cause and continuing to support it, shows that the mission was worthy and that we have made a dent. And I can tell you, for me personally, one of the things that I've never really understood about suicide, and again, I'm just being transparent about this. Historically, I kind of viewed it as being selfish. I'm like, how could you do that, right? And one of the things you learn is it's not about that at all. It's kind of the opposite of it. Generally, it's people that feel like they're a burden on their family. Like, they feel like they're doing their family a favor by taking their life. And that's one of the reasons why Birdman did it, because he lost one of his best friends to suicide. And so this was a way for him to raise awareness for it, because somebody near and dear to him, he said, look, I'm tired of losing my brothers to suicide. I've lost as many to suicide as I have in combat. What is going on here? And I think that's part of the ongoing dilemma. It's, how do we recognize these signs? How do we teach people that asking for help is not a weakness? it actually it takes a lot of strength and courage to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's so much vulnerability involved in saying, look, I need help. I don't know what's going on. Help me. And honestly, but like you said, it's also frustrating because you don't feel like you're making a dent in it. But anything that involves awareness, you don't see things right away. It's when you look back 5 years from now, you can say, all right, that was a starting point, right? There was a pin we put in the poster, and now we can see those trends as far as having impacts on them.
Well, I think that's such a good point, even broadening out any intervention. You and I have talked about personal health many times, both I think on camera and off camera, about, it's not, you didn't become overweight in a week. It took potentially years. It may take years to shake that, to develop the habits necessary. And so that's your point about it may take 5 years to look back and go, hey, we made a dent in veteran suicide through an effort like yours, or raising awareness, or all of the many charities that are out there trying to work on this problem. Moving that needle may take years, because we didn't get to having such a high rate of veteran suicide overnight either. So such a good point. Is Birdman, or do you have anything else, crazy upcoming that we should be aware of, that you're doing, either maybe not crazy, but just an awareness tour or something like that? Or do you have indeed another, I don't know, 14 continent challenge where you're going to hit all of them twice in 2 weeks or something like that?
So we do have some big things coming up. One, we were not able to get to Antarctica as part of this trip. And that's one of the things that we realized with this trip. And anytime you attempt something that's never been done before, you realize there's so many things outside your control, right? You got to pivot. And so the conditions in Antarctica were less than supportive of what we were doing. And we were given a window like, hey, if you guys land here, you maybe have 2 hours. Like, how do you skydive and run a marathon in 2 hours, right?
Right.
And not to mention, if you get stuck there, you sacrifice the whole mission. So we made a game day decision and said, look, instead of doing Antarctica, we're going to do Africa twice. So we started Cape Town, we did Perth, we did Dubai, and then we did Cairo, which I don't know if your audience followed it, but what was interesting, we got to skydive over the pyramids.
I was say, I remember reading you either landed on or near or over, something with
Yes,
landing on the pyramid.
We skydived over the pyramids, all of us. Like, that's one memory I will never forget. The whole time you're like, is this really happening? Am I daydreaming? So with that being said, our plan is to go do Antarctica in January to kind of recheck that box art. We did do all 7. And then me personally and independently, I turned 50 in March. And so I've put together a group of friends, and we're going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro to celebrate my 50th birthday. So we will be on top of the mountain on my 50th birthday.
That's awesome.
So I'm pretty excited about that, because it was one of those things. My wife said, look, you turned 50 this year. If you want to do something special, plan it. And you know this, David, but I'm the type person, look, when you give me those kind of statements, you need to put qualifiers around it. Right? So she assumed it'd be like a surprise party, maybe fly a few friends in. So when I came out and said, hey, love, I did it. I planned my special day. We're going to Tanzania. And she goes, what? What are you talking about? Like, I really thought we were going to do like a nice Mexican dinner and have some. I was like, you said plan something special. And so, I mean,
a different scale in mind.
Well, but babe, you only turned 50 once, right? If it was 51, maybe, but 50 is a pretty big deal. And, you and I talk about it, aging and the realization that there's things that you can't do that you once could do. And so to me, each one of these decades that pass, I want them to be memorable. I don't want to remember, hey, I was sitting at a nice restaurant on my 50th. I mean, to me, there's nothing incredible about that. Anybody could do that on any given day. But how many people could say, look, you took 12 people up Mount Kilimanjaro. And on this trip, I mean, we've got some amazingly talented, diverse group of individuals. We've got rev cycle consultants. I've got a country country musician star. We've got a documentary specialist. I've got 3 Army Rangers going with us. I've got a world champion skydiver with us. I mean, I've got my best friends from high school. This is truly an eclectic group, right? And to be able to share that together, I can't wait.
That sounds amazing, Shay. Mountain climbing, I'm not great with heights, so I don't know that mountain climbing would be for me. But I think we talked about it before that trying to aim big is when you're, especially if you're setting a challenge for yourself. Hey, I want to do something big for my birthday. Well, yeah, everything's a matter of scale, and I think for folks out there who brings up an interesting question that I'd love to get just your mindset on. I think there's folks out there like yourself. I'm sure if I set my sights on Kilimanjaro, that would be financially something that I could make happen. But there's people out there who are of different means, or different stage of their life. So let's start to turn the conversation towards balance, because that was one of the things I told you I want to talk about. Let's use that Kilimanjaro trip as an example for folks. If they don't have the means to do that, whether it's because financial or maybe, I don't know, they've got a disability. Do you have advice for folks to set their sights big, to do something big, and yet have that balance against those restrictions in their life?
Absolutely. Number one, don't let those disadvantages that you perceive be a limiter. You should not change your goal because of a current financial situation or a physical disability. When I raced in the Ironman World Championships 10 years ago, I told my wife, there's no way I'm going there if I can't take the whole family. Just started a new job. We had 0 disposable income. 0. We were about as low as a point we could be in our lives financially. And when I made that commitment, I started seeking out, like, how can I raise money? I raised $20,000 in 3 weeks. One of which included meeting a stranger at Starbucks who donated $10,000 to the cause.
Wow.
Right? And again, you can't script that. You can't make that up and say, you know what, I'm going to go look for donors in Starbucks and maybe somebody's going to write me a check. But what happens is if you tell yourself, I'm going, whatever it takes, your brain subconsciously start focus on how can we make this happen? And so it starts looking for occurrences in your everyday life to support that, right? And that's why if you're also a negative person, well, guess what? Your brain's going to look for a reason to say, you know what, David, you can't afford it. You can't go. You haven't done the training. But if you convince yourself, I'm worthy of going, I am going, I promise you, you will find a way. There's people that have done Kilimanjaro, double amputees, right? I mean, it all comes down to how bad do you want it and what are you willing to do to make it happen? And so that's always my advice to everybody. Like, give me the reasons why you can't, and I'm going to give you twice as many why you can. Well, let's put it on paper, right? Let's commit to it. And then you acknowledge this is not a limiter. You think it is, but it really isn't.
Right.
And you know this, David, too. Like, the more you start sharing your goal and what you want to do, people will reach out because they want to support you. Like, vicariously, they want to live through you because maybe they don't have the courage to do what you're doing, right? Maybe there's something going on in their life. But by supporting you, you're giving them the ability to participate in that journey. And that's one of the things that I've realized over the last 15 years, ever since I started Ironman, is there are so many people that want to help. I just need to be able to reach out and say, look, I need help. But here's the work I'm putting in. I'm not asking for handouts. I'm working my butt off. Can you support me? Can you give me some guidance?
One of the things I think about you in particular when we talk about the fact that perhaps other folks, for whatever reason, good reasons or bad, aren't doing some of the things you're doing. that I appreciate is you often document and then share and post the heck out of your adventures, because then to me anyway, people get to see some of that, and it's part of your uplifting message, but it's also, I don't know if it's intentional, but it's a way of, I think, giving back to those who are supporting you. Hey, I'm over in Italy, I saw that recently. Hey, I'm doing the 7X challenge. Hey, I'm running an Ironman, and I'm meeting cool people, and I'm having a great time. And I think that I get value out of that. I don't know if others do, but I think, to me, maybe that's a version of a giving back on some of what you're talking about, where those other people out there aren't doing some of the stuff you're doing, and they might be doing other cool stuff too. I mean, let's not downplay other activities other people are doing. There's not enough time in a human lifespan to do everything. Just isn't.
Agree. And that's why, I'm a big believer we all should be sharing and not comparing our experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can live vicariously through somebody saying, hey, look, I taught somebody how to fly fish this weekend. I haven't personally done it, right? And so I'm enamored when you write like what you did and how you do it. And that's what I try to do with my adventures. Look, I want to bring you along. I want you to partake in this. And maybe it excites you enough. You're like, you know what? I'd never thought about it. That sounds pretty dang cool.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I've had people reach out and say, look, hey, I saw your post. I'd love to do it. And I can't tell you how many people have reached out and said, look, I want to do an Ironman. A buddy of mine, David Bittner, was one of these people that a year ago we're having dinner and I was talking about one of these races. And he goes, man, I'd love to do one. I said, well, let's fix that. When we leave dinner, I'm going to email you the plan. I'm going to hold you accountable. And David put in the hard work, even though he's a chief revenue officer, a lot of demands, 4 kids. And at the end of end of July, he and I flew up to Maine, Augusta, Maine, and did a half Ironman together. And I'm going to tell you, watching him cross that finish line meant so much to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like me personally crossing, I didn't really feel much other than, hey, that was a tough day.
Right.
But I got so much out of watching him because I saw somebody that said, look, this was absolutely the hardest thing I've ever done. Like it scared the crap out of me, right? But I did it anyway. And that's the stuff like you hope you can encourage people to have that leap of faith that if you're not scared, then you're not going big enough.
Mm-hmm.
But I assure you, once you step out, kind of like you doing with your podcast, right? I mean, I know there was some trepidation on your part to make that commitment, and look what you've done with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Shay, one of the things then that I was thinking about recently, I was reading Dr. Peter Attia's new book, Outlive, and it's great for folks out there who want to read something interesting about longevity. You should check it out. He's got a bunch of podcasts and stuff as well. I've been listening to Dr. Attia for a number of years, but partway through, he was talking about avoidance of injury. And I was thinking about my friend Shay and his many surgeries. And I said, well, I gotta talk to Shay again. And some of what we've just started to talk about today around balance between sort of perhaps a pessimistic attitude. I can't do things. I have limitations on things, and I can do, or I will do, and balancing those two. But there's a couple areas of balance that I really wanted to talk with you about, Shay, and the first might be exactly that. The specific item that triggered me to think about you is around avoidance of injury as we age. You talk about coming up on 50. It's a couple years on me, but I'm getting the years under my belt as well. And it's something I think about. I think about more often than I ever used to. Is, I want to continue to improve my fitness, but an injury has major setbacks. And so how do you balance pushing the limit? Because you're very much sort of an example of what somebody can do. I mean, the Ironmans and performing at the top of the age brackets for that, Kilimanjaro at 50, a lot of people wouldn't do that at 40, or whatever. So you're a great example of what people can do. How do you balance, or maybe it's something you struggle with, that against, wanting to maximize the length of human life that you get to retain health. Because I mean, you blow a knee out too bad or something like that where it's not repairable, that's going to have an impact on later years. So how are you trying to balance that out, or does it not enter the mindset for you?
Honestly, it doesn't really factor into my
Okay.
mindset. I'm one of those that believe use it or lose it.
Hmm.
But one of the things I have done, especially with age, I try to be smarter when I start to feel twinges in my hip or somewhere. I'm like, ooh, you know what? Maybe I better lighten up. I don't try to
Mm-hmm.
push through it, right? Younger Shay would say, hey, no pain, no gain. Let's break through it. We can do anything. And so I think that's probably what I focus more on, just being more in tune with my body. I do a lot more preventive stuff. I get deep tissue once a month. I get a deep foot massage. I know that sounds crazy, but that's been incredible. I get those once a month. I get dry needling done. I do a lot of stuff to try to keep me as good and flexible as I can be. But I also realize, look, I've had 43 surgeries now.
Mm-hmm.
Getting injured is a part of my life. So I don't assume that's going to change just because I'm 50 now.
Mm-hmm.
I had 2 surgeries this year. I got to have 2 more. Part of it's because of a surgery complication. I had 2 surgeries last year. But one of the things I do is I seek out a lot of alternative treatments. I had a fibula stress fracture 5 weeks ago, right as I was getting back into full running stride. And I think this was probably as a result of 7X.
Mm.
But I've been using a bone stimulator twice a day, infrared light treatment twice a day, taking some special supplements, and I'll be racing, 6 weeks after the stress fracture in a half Ironman. And so I think using these alternative treatments has definitely helped. I'm trying to be better about eating, and that's one of the things I'm very aware of, right? I can't eat my double cheeseburger combo meals anymore, and I have to cut back on that. But one of the things I do want to do, David, is focus on, you talk about balances. I don't think balance exists in life, right? At
Mm.
any given time, we're one side of the pendulum to the other. The analogy I like to use is kind of like accountants, right? If you talk to an accountant from November to April, it's just insane, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they have this down period, 3-4 months, and then they start gearing up for the next season. And that's kind of the way it is with me and raising our 5 kids, right? Like we have full soccer season, even though they all play travel soccer and we travel all the time. But I know, there's 5 months where I really can't plan on doing anything for myself race wise because every weekend we're going to be spending at a soccer field and I don't want to miss those soccer games. But there's a 4-month window after that I can do some races. And so I want to maximize it and get 4 Ironman events in during those 4 months. And so that's one of the things I try to do. But I want to be an active dad, right? Like I don't want to be a dad that doesn't do anything just so I can walk easier when I'm 75.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and maybe I'm not giving the advice people should be living by, but it's one of those, I'm kind of hoping technology continues to increase. And when I need those double knee replacements, which I know I'm going to need, and when I need that hip replacement, I can still have the same quality of life I have now. The race I did 3 weeks ago, the oldest finishers was a 78-year-old male and 77-year-old female. And those are the people I look up to. I was like, I want to be you when I grow up. Like, I want to keep doing things. But I caveat that with, I'm not going full tilt like I did 5 years ago. Like 5 years ago, it was so important for me to be on the podium that I was willing to take some risk to get there. And now I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm going to push hard, but I'm not going to push myself where I could do long-term damage. And so I think the last 5 years, that really has settled in quite a bit.
We'll talk about that a little bit because I guess that's part of what I wanted to talk about, because I think you had privately in one of our conversations expressed some of that. And so what made that change for you? Is it merely an aging thing? Is it the number of surgeries? Is it like what what went into that decision to sort of say, look, I'm still going to push, but if I'm not number one, it's not the end of the world? Is it because you've been number one and, got nothing to prove? Like what's the mindset around that?
It's a combination of things. Number one, I think it's kind of that self-awareness that, hey, look, I don't have anything to prove, right? Like, my kids don't love me any differently whether I'm first or 101st. I don't know if they know the difference, right? I mean, it's just, I don't think they care. Like, they don't care about any of the medals hanging up downstairs. It's just, hey, this is what daddy does. But it's also, I feel like once you've accomplished the goals, it's kind of like done that. Now I'm ready for the next stage. And that's where, to me, the fulfillment comes from helping others do it, right? Like, you've lost that hunger of yourself being on the podium. You're like, hey, I expect this. It doesn't mean as much, it's not as special, to where now if you can help somebody else achieve a dream, you get that same enthusiasm and new love that you used to have for it. And I think that's what the big transition has been for me in the last 5 years. It's kind of serving in that mentor coaching role and living through these others and helping them achieve their dreams. And I also feel like that's why I've been blessed with some of the opportunities I've been given, David. Because when you look at 7X, when Birdman reached in and said, look, I chose you because of your attitude. He goes, I needed somebody that no matter how bad it got was going to be there to motivate the team. And my role at 7X is unlike any role I've ever had. Every team I've been on, it's, I need you to go as hard and as fast as you can, right? I need you to win. 7X, it was complete opposite. It's like, look, we need you to slow down the pace. We need you to pace with the other guys because they are not endurance athletes. These are elite warriors that their whole mission is, we will go as long as we need to complete the job. Your job is to set a pace that allows us to finish each marathon, to keep doing 7 back to back to back, which for me meant running a pace much slower than I normally would for a marathon. But that's also what meant so much to me when we've completed each one of those. It was like, look, I was able to contribute to these guys finishing, right? When you can take people that aren't marathon runners and get them to run 7 back to back, it's impressive.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I don't know how to put it into words other than say it meant a lot to me. I was very emotional about it. And I don't know how you replace it, right? And I think that was part of that PTSD that kicked in after the trip. I was like, man, like I need something like that to fill the void now. Whereas historically, I felt that void by myself signing up and doing crazy stuff. Now I try to fill that void by how can I help somebody else do it?
There's a couple interesting things in that, and I'm trying to figure out where I want to take the dialogue because with the proving yourself type of comment, I think so many of us, I know I've had to work hard to stop feeling like I have to prove myself. And I think a lot of people do that. And I honestly wonder, bringing it back to the veterans' mental health, how many of these people feel like I have no idea, and you might not either, but how many of these people get out of the military and feel like they have to start over and have something to prove? And what is that impact on the mental health? When, to me, because it's basically a different world, right? The military life, full-time military life versus civilian world, it's a different world. And do they feel that way? Because I hope not. There's nothing, for me anyway, there's nothing they need to prove. Yeah, you got to come to work and do your job or whatever, but there's nothing to prove. And so coming back to that topic, if anybody listens to this out there and feels like you do, you don't. You just don't.
I agree. And I would say for these veterans, again, it's hard to speak for them because obviously I didn't serve, but I have the utmost respect for them that did. It's one of those, like, how do you go from an environment where you are an ultimate machine? Like, millions of dollars are spent to make you who you are. Now you're put in a position where all this specialized training you have, you can't use it in its original intent. You need to repurpose that in a different environment with different rules. right? Like when you're in a war, you're taught, hey, whatever it takes, you win, right? And I feel like that's the challenge. It's like they've got all these tools, but nobody has spent time saying, look, here's how you can use each one of these tools. Like I am blown away how many of these special force members are just natural entrepreneurs, right? They're so creative. They're the way they can work and come up with solutions. You see why they were chosen to do the jobs they did. And so I wish there was a specialized program to say, look, we're going to help readapt you when you come out. I know there's some organizations working on that, but it'd be nice if there was some formulated, well-funded organization doing this, right? To match this up. Because these people could take any underperforming company and take them to the next level. But then that's the key too, right? Because as you know, like for us in healthcare, how do you come into a healthcare environment which these are not the same kind of people you would find on a Navy SEAL team?
Right.
Right. I mean, I'm not judging. I'm just stating a fact. And so
Yeah.
how do you motivate, inspire, and lead these people who have a whole different mindset than the people you've been around? And I think that's where all of us need help, right? Like myself included. Like I recognize I'm a very obsessive compulsive personality. I realize there's some people I meet initially probably, this guy's too much, right? I can't handle being around him. You know, my hope is that with time, we've reconciled and you understand that it was never intentional. It's just that's who I am. That's how I got to where I am, right? I had to be very forward, very direct. And thankfully, my wife's helped me over the years tone down some of this. But it's how do you redirect that kind of energy in a positive manner that can motivate people that aren't motivated the same way as you? And David, I know you know this, you know, like for me, being a father of 5 has been a great challenge, right? Like each one of my kids is motivated completely different. My oldest daughter, if I want to get her motivated, just tell her, you can't do it. Just quit. There's no way you're going to do it. And she's going to prove me wrong, right? I know that's her. My next 15-year-old son, he's the kind that very analytical to say, buddy, you've done a great job. You've got everything it takes to be successful. You need to step back, think what you're doing, and really focus on this, right? So with each one of my kids, I have to take a different approach. And I think that's what we need to do more in the workplaces. It's not a one-size-fits-all mentality, right? We can't say, here's how we motivate our entire team. That doesn't work, right? Some of your most talented people are the ones that never speak up, right? And you just kind of ignore them because you think, hey, they don't care. They care. They're just waiting for you to reach out to them in a way that can engage them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And within that sort of need to customize your approach, is the second thought that I had around your comments about moving towards that mentor and coach area, actually. So that they interlink for me in my head, which is I think the move towards, I guess the move towards mentor and coach is probably fairly natural as humans, age up, right? We either lose some physical capabilities or we add wisdom or both or whatever the case might be. Then, so you're moving into that. And I think that is kind of a natural occurrence or one would hope should be, for people. Then we add in or consider what you just mentioned about in business, the need to customize perhaps more than what we're doing. And I wonder within all that, I promise there's a question coming. I wonder within all that, how we can help those of us who are reaching that point in our careers and in our life, like you, like myself, I think, where we're moving, not that I'm an elite athlete like you, but just moving really towards more that coach and mentor type of role. How can we help those folks to, honestly, I'm going to say, make the time to bring that customized nuance? With your kids, you basically have to, like, it's a must. At work, there's so many pressures in most jobs in modern America to, get the job done, to move along, move fast. And there doesn't always feel time to do the nuanced individualistic approach. So what are your thoughts on how do we do that? Either, folks like us who are, moving more over that edge into those mentor type roles, or just everybody, and just broad ranging advice that you might have on how to bring that nuanced approach to the fore.
It's a great question. For me, it's always like I tell my kids, it's up to you to reach out to your teachers, your coaches, and let them know, look, hey, I have a desire to get better. I'm not performing how I want to perform, or, whether it's in the classroom or on the soccer pitch. Can you help me? Like, what do I need to do? And I'm going to tell you, it's a struggle. I feel like this generation doesn't, and maybe we've done that to them, right? Doesn't want to ask because they're always like, well, I'm embarrassed. I'm like, are you kidding? Like when I was in school, all the time, I was like, hey, teacher, like I just bombed that test. Like, can you help me? Like, and they will go out of their way because these teachers don't want to fail you. They don't want you getting bad grades, right? It's a reflection on them.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things we got to remember. Same in the workplace, it's our performance is a reflection of our bosses. So they have a vested interest in us doing better. But as a leader, we also need to be setting up forums to do that. I know like with the sales teams I've run, we have our weekly calls. We spend the first 15 minutes talking about how was your weekend, right? Trying to build some rapport and asking some questions, getting people to open up so you kind of know what do they value in life, right? And try to build that rapport. Whereas I feel like now, and I think COVID didn't help us in this work from home environment, like people are in these silos. I was just talking with a VP friend of mine. His son right out of college got a job in their health system doing Medicare cost reporting, which, he was excited about that. Right. And then he's doing it remotely from home. And he's like, Dad, like I'm miserable. I feel disconnected, and he was like, look, when I started my job 30 years ago, we'd all get together after work, right? We'd grab a drink, we'd grab something to eat, we'd have lunches together and build that camaraderie. And that's where I feel like this generation and just people in general missing out right now. And for me, I encourage people like reach out to people every week. Try to go meet a stranger. I have at least one coffee or lunch meeting a week with somebody new. People reach out to me or I reach out to them on LinkedIn and said, look, hey, we live close by. It's a shame we don't know each other. So I wish I had the answer, but I think it starts with one, people have to learn how to ask for it. You got to become comfortable recognizing the people that are on top got there because somebody bestowed that experience on them, right? They weren't just born natural. And then two, when you're in that position, what are you doing to reach down? Like, are you actively reaching out to people that you can see had that work ethic, that drive, and say, look, here's a couple things that if you did this, it would take you to the next level.
Yeah, I in my new role, I just started up this week actually. I've been trying to formulate and carve out the time to do it. Time to go and just kind of no agenda be available for the staff at a given office, because I manage a number of satellite offices, and go just be there like during the lunch hour or something like that. And it was the first one. I think it went okay, but my goal is mostly just to listen. I don't want to defend something if somebody's upset about a change, about a new policy, about a whatever. I just want to hear them out is a goal. And part of it for me is merely that connectedness that you mentioned. But part of it is also, I'm not there every day. I don't see or hear how it's going with the number of offices I manage. And I do, while I am generally on the productivity front anyway, a fan of remote work and the lack of distractions it offers, I think it is harder in a lot of ways, and harder meaning you aren't as interconnected. It's impossible to have the hallway conversation about a problem you're working on or to accidentally, or I shouldn't say accidentally, by happenstance, bump into the CEO in the elevator or something like that. Those won't happen if you're remote. And so that's such a good point in terms of trying to bring those targeted approaches, like I was asking about, back to the table. Is, I think the theme I get from your point there, the subtext is, it's a two-way street. The employee needs to reach out, but the leader needs to be available.
Yep.
And probably available with intent, so that they, because otherwise, if there's not that intentional, either a set aside moment in the day or the week or the quarter or something, a lot of employees, and I don't know if it's generational or if it's just the current American culture, they're perhaps afraid to come forward. They're afraid to reach out. They're bashful. They're worried about the embarrassment, like you said. So I think it's a two-way street, and so keeping that in mind is really important for all of us, because we can all be on both sides of that dialogue.
Agree. And I think it's teaching people, you sharing some of the things that are troubling you. You're not being weak by doing that, right? You're being human. And if we collectively can help you solve those issues, right? There may be somebody struggling, maybe somebody sick in their home. So if you need prayers, or if we can bring some food dishes to your house, right? It helps the whole company. And that's the things, like, you can do stuff to serve them, but it also benefits you because they're a better and happier person at the workplace. I don't know. I just feel like so much in the past few years, people have become so self-absorbed in their own desires and goals that they overlook those around them and realize, hey, look, I didn't get here on my own. Right? Like, what can I do to help others? And I think you and I know this. We get as much, if not more, satisfaction from helping others become successful as opposed from our own success.
I love seeing either existing employees of mine, get a promotion. I mean, if they leave, I hate to see them go, but I'm glad for them. Or former employees. I've got a very happy story of a former employee that's a director now, and was sort of feeling, when I met them, they were feeling very burnt out, and now they're kind of living a great life, and they made some changes, but I'm so excited for that and for them. And you're absolutely right. I think that is part of that mentor and leader and coach mindset, is we have to succeed with that mindset. I think you have to not be afraid of other people's success. Would you agree with that?
100%. And it's one of those things I struggle with, David, that, say, for instance, like LinkedIn. I've had certain companies comment like, hey, Shay, you can't post those things. Those aren't what executives post about. And sometimes almost made me question, wait a minute, am I not being professional enough in my post? But what I realized was it's more a reflection, like, they're not comfortable being vulnerable and saying that they have flaws and exposing them to everybody. Like, for me, I draw strength on that, right? Like, when I say, look, here's mistakes I make a lot of them. Trust me. Ask my wife, ask my kids. Like, I make a lot of mistakes, but I own them. I don't try to pin them on other people. And I feel like the more we all do that, the stronger all of us are, right? It creates that cohesion with your team that, look, you're not afraid to fail because you know they're going to rally and support you. And I've seen that, like, with some of these leadership teams, like, you read, all they do is post stuff about, hey, we did this. This was great. And I was like, why don't you post some real stuff so that we can all get behind you and say, look, we understand you have struggles just like all of us.
Yeah. Well, Shay, we're coming up on our time. We've talked about the 7X challenge. We've talked about veterans' mental health. We've talked about balance, both physical balance, work-life type balance. We've talked about moving into roles of mentorship and leadership. And so we've covered what I hope to talk with you about today. But I can't help but, somebody who's got such a, set of inspiring achievements in their life, I can't help but want to wrap up and say, are there any, motivational nuggets you want to leave the audience with? Because I think the first time on episode 1, you had a lot of really inspiring stuff to say about do something that makes you, scared, set big goals. You're obviously, Kilimanjaro, you've got your own set of big goals for the coming year. Do you have any parting thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
I would encourage people to sit down and truly reflect at where you're at in your life and say, would 18-year-old self see you right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had dinner with a friend of mine who's a chief revenue officer, and we were just laughing. She goes, are you kidding me? At 18, right? Like, I was working as a clerk in a store. Did I ever think I'd be overseeing $1 billion budget and having 50, direct reports? And so I think sometimes we lose sight of what we've achieved in life
Mm-hmm.
and how many things had to happen for us to get to where we are. So don't underplay those. Like, we all have done some pretty significant things in our life. Like, just talk with my wife, like, babe, like, did you ever think you would have raised 5 kids?
Mm-hmm.
I sure as heck didn't, right? Like, it blows my mind to think anybody's that crazy. I was like, to this day, that is still my greatest achievement, right? Is having 5 kids, and we're about to celebrate our 20th anniversary. And as somebody who was raised, parents were divorced at 4, something I take pretty serious. Now, I was fortunate; my parents have always been extremely active in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, being married is a big deal. It requires a commitment that is challenging, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've all had those times where we're tempted to throw the towel in. But anything in life that's worth having, you're going to face those breaking moments. And it's how you respond in those moments that determines the life you're going to lead. And I can tell you, with my wife and I, we've been at rock bottom. We almost lost our daughter when she was 2. She was in a coma for 8 days. Full recovery. We lost a house and foreclosure. I mean, we truly have been through it all.
Mm-hmm.
But never once was I worried, because no matter what, she was at my side, never questioned me, and said, look, I trust you. I know you will do what's best for the family. And life's pretty easy when you have somebody like that in your corner. And so no matter what it is you're going through in life, think about who is standing at your side and use that as your weapon going forward. I mean, that is strength that you can't buy.
Mm-hmm.
You can't achieve that. You have it. Build on that.
Well, great parting thoughts. Surround yourself with, find a good partner if you can, or at least surround yourself with good people. Set big goals, big challenges, and make sure you're taking inventory of where you're at, where you want to go, and make sure you're looking at yourself and not at others. I think it's something we talked about earlier on the call. So Shay, for myself, I always enjoy these. I think that this one, we might have gone around a number of different topics, kind of straying broadly, but overall, the talk about balance and the talk about 7X, and I really enjoyed it today. And thank you for your time once again on No Bad Questions.
Well, thank you, sir. Always enjoy our time together.
Bye now.
See you.